right, let's have everyone start making their way to their seats. Should we do the raffle right now? We can't do that. All right. We're going to try to do brief announcements tonight. Last night I failed to mention, for those of you that came in last night, and we've been announcing this all festival, that if you paid for the demo or paid for a class that did not go out, you will be refunded. It might take us a couple weeks to figure it all out, but please expect that. And if there's any, if you're missing it, make sure you send us a message on that. We do have our new class schedule for tomorrow. It is up online and on our social media channels. And I think there's still some spots left. And if you're wondering about when they end, I believe they end, or the last one's at noon. So we're trying to be conscious of that people are going to be traveling tomorrow. The remote, how many people did the remote route challenge? Yeah, awesome. Normally we have the trophy up here and announce the winners, but I think we are going to have to wait until the doping tests come back in before we announce the winners, but we will do that, and you will hear about who won, and they will get their name on the trophy, so stand by for that. Bivouac Bingo, you have one more day to accomplish that. The bingo cards are inside the official program. All the rules are there. We'll be sending you the prizes for that as well. Photo contest. The photo contest, any photos you take and you hashtag Michigan Ice Fest 2024. We go through all of those, pick out some favorites, put them on Facebook, have the one that gets the most likes gets a free registration, free demo, and a free class for 2025. I think we will save the rest for the intermission. So with that, we'll get our program started tonight.
The Michigan Ice Fest recognizes the tribal nations of this territory, the Keweenaw Indian community, the Lac Vieux Desert Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, the Bay Mills Indian community, the Hannahville Indian community, and the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians. We acknowledge that we stand upon the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe. Welcome to the Michigan Ice Fest. With title sponsor, Black Diamond Equipment. Live, climb, repeat. Sponsored by Patagonia, building the best product, causing no unnecessary harm, using business to protect nature, not bound by convention. The North Face, tested in labs, proven on expeditions, trusted by athletes. Mountain Hardware. We create performance apparel and equipment to empower outdoor athletes to live boldly. Petzl. Access the inaccessible. Scarpa. Explore innovation and tradition with Scarpa, where a rich legacy meets cutting-edge advancements. Whether you ski, climb, hike, or run, Scarpa is committed to ensuring that enthusiasts experience top-tier quality in every adventure they pursue. No place too far. Camp USA. Lighter, faster. Camp. Yeti. Built for the wild. Arc'teryx. Arc'teryx for what's to come. La Sportiva. For over 90 years, we've been innovating products that let you go where you dream to go, do what you dream to do, and live how you want to live. La Sportiva. Innovation with passion. Rad. We are the mountain people. We are rad. And Sterling Ropes. Sterling designs and manufactures the highest quality rope and cord for the tallest peaks, toughest climbs. And Munising, Michigan, the home of the festival and your gateway to Pictured Rock's National Lakeshore.
Hey everybody, my name is Zimmerman. I am delighted to be here with you this evening. This is really wonderful to be here at the festival. And as you all know, it has been a tricky week to be running an ice festival. So can we give it up for the organizers real quick who have been keeping us all Bill, thank you to you and your team. This is oftentimes when there's no ice climbing at an ice festival, things don't go that well, but this has been really great. So my name is Graham. I am a professional alpinist. I've been doing that for about 15 years or so. I've been climbing for significantly longer than that. And I'm here tonight to share some stories from a book that I have just written called A Fine Line. And this is a book in which I really work to capture not only my career as an alpinist chasing down big hard routes in the greater ranges of the world, but also how I've worked to balance that career against a marriage with my wife Shannon and a career in climate advocacy. So we're going to be talking about some of the climate change that we're seeing here in Michigan right now. We're going to be talking about how the sport that we love can be balanced against these other things that are really important to us. And I'm really excited to dig into that with you. And what we're going to start with is a quick 5-minute video just to kind of get us into the mountains. This is a video that's composed of archival shots from my last 15 years of climbing and alongside passages from the book that we're going to be talking about and in one of my favorite rock and roll tracks. So we'll kick things off with that, and I will see you here in just a few minutes.
When I started climbing, I experienced a sense of freedom and challenge unlike anything else in my life.
It's my birthday. I'm 24. Getting old.
It was more than the muscular strain of pulling myself up steep terrain.
There's Graham leading the first pitch.
Something closer to blood in my mouth after a fight I had never experienced.
It's pretty cool.
It felt natural and pure.
Rock and roll, go for it. We love you.
Every step up the glacier was one step further into a secret the mountains kept to themselves. All I needed to do was learn, improve, and to survive. In a life in which I never, in a traditional sense, found God, the high mountains are places that for me represent the holy. The practice of climbing has been the thread that has wound its way through my life. It has been a handrail on which I have relied to keep me steady through turbulence. It has been a bearing to follow when the flow of my life has been tranquil.
Love this.
My life in the mountains has been a love story, as I have followed my heart into their depths and into the arms of an amazing romantic partner. It has also been a story of endurance, as I have persevered to summits and through the seemingly endless slog of a career fighting the climate crisis.
When it comes down to it, we need systemic action in order to solve climate.
And it has been a story of heartbreak due to the loss of partners and friends who are attempting to define the cutting edge of what it means to be a climber and a human. I have wondered if a balance between a marriage, a career, and climbing in the big mountains was possible. And if it was, what was the point? Why did it seem so important? Where should that line be drawn? Far away from so much that I love. I loved climbing just as much as I needed to ensure that I came home in one piece. I scolded myself for decisions that nearly killed me. I vowed to learn from them, to keep my mind and body sharp. With my body rigid and my breath held, I closed my eyes. I felt my existence shrink to a single point as I opened my eyes, placed my faith in an axe tip hooked over a fringe of rock, and moved up, silently repeating precision, strength, patience, until I lost myself in the methodical pattern of movement, thought, and breath. I was rubbed down to my raw essence. My soul was exposed. This is what you came for. This is what you yearn for. This is everything you want.
Give me what?
I stared into the infinite, a place where everything could either end or begin. Ripples of light and shadow, snow and stone extended to every vanishing point until the earth blurred with the sky. I whispered a silent thank you to the mountains, accepting hazy recollections as my only lasting experience. And for me, this is it. This is the fine line.
So it is really fun to be here to speak with you tonight about this book. And what we're going to do is I'm going to tell a couple of stories from the book. I'm going to share some passages from the book. It's mostly kind of from the younger years when I was learning how to climb. And I'm also going to give you some kind of little behind the scenes on the process of writing it. And I think something that's really important to share is why I ended up writing this book. I'll share that I ultimately didn't, in the beginning, intend to go out and write a memoir. I actually pitched the publisher on a completely different project. I pitched them on a guidebook to advocacy, and they were like, yeah, we'd love for you to write that sometime, but can you write us a memoir? And I was like, I thought that meant they were calling me old. And I was kind of taken aback, like, oh, I'm only 37, I'm still in the midst of my career. And they were like, oh, no, we're not calling you old, but we still want a memoir. And so that meant I had to kind of sit back and figure out what I wanted to capture within this book. And I really landed on three particular things. And the first is that over my career as an alpinist, I have received some excellent advice from mentors. And that's something that I really wanted to share with my community, to share with you, and make sure that all that really good advice didn't stop with me, and it was something that we could, through this book, be able to really demonstrate and share with a broader community. Also, when I was a young climber, I was brought up into this culture that told me that I should throw away everything other than climbing in my life in order to be the climber that I wanted to be. It was kind of the Dr. Doom generation of the late 90s and early aughts. And it was very Nietzschean, very like trying to be the Ubermensch or something like that. And as an early 20-year-old, I loved it. I thought it was so great. Oh yeah, throw away anything not in service to climbing, and then you'll be the climber that you want to be. But over the course of my career, I've really honestly found that maybe that's not the best way, or maybe not the best way for me, and to be able to share another pathway in which we go and we try these incredible objectives in the big mountains of the world, or mountains that are much closer to home, and we balance those trips and the decisions that we make on them against this goal of sticking around, this goal of being a good community member and a good partner. That's something I really wanted to demonstrate to you, to my community. And finally, something that was really important to me was to capture the memories of those climbing partners and friends who we have lost to this practice. And to be able to do that in a format that is not just an Instagram post or not just a conversation, but something that is written down, something that has some staying power that will sit on the shelf. And that really turned into a big part of the purpose of writing this book. And so, with that in mind, I'm actually going to share a passage from the prologue, which is, I have been fortunate to be a part of a generation of mountain climbers who have had the opportunity to accomplish some amazing things. Many of these folks are still with us, but a number are not. Some of these are people I might consider better suited to have written the story, if not for their loss, while attempting to discover the cutting edge of what it means to be a climber and a human. During the past decade, I have lost many partners and kindred souls, people who defined our generation by pouring their hearts into this practice. In many ways, I feel that I am writing this book because I am one of my generation of alpinists in the United States left to tell this tale. It's a role I take on with a strong sense of honor, responsibility, and sadness. This story is a tribute to those we have lost to this practice. And I know that might feel like starting this conversation, starting this talk with sadness and with a real bummer, but I encourage you not to think of it that way. Because these are people that I carry with me every day, and I really want to have with us in the room tonight. Not to be sad, but so that we can celebrate them and their memories. So now we're going to go to the big mountains, and we're going to go to kind of one of the first stories in this book of me as a younger climber. This is the Ruth Gorge of Alaska. This is an incredible zone to go alpine climbing, and let me just tell you why. We have these massive granite walls that you can see shooting up out of the glacier here. They're between 3,000 and 5,000 feet tall. They are very steep. The rock is pretty good, and they are laced with incredible lines of snow and ice. And not only that, but there's this flat glacier that you can see at the bottom of this photograph that allows for you to land a plane right at the base of this stuff. So it's really easy to access. You go up to Alaska, you go to Talkeetna, and then you fly onto the glacier, and then there you are with all of your stuff, all of your equipment, food, and supplies for as many weeks as you want to spend on the glacier. And there you are with just you and your partners and these incredible objectives. And so I went there for my first time in 2010. I was 24 years old. You might have seen in the video me talking about feeling old at that point, which is ridiculous. But but we went there and we went to try the south face of Mount Bradley, which is this really incredible piece of alpine real estate. And we were really ambitious at the time. We were very fired up. And I remember us sitting in base camp and looking up at this wall and saying to ourselves, okay, well, we've been climbing El Capitan in Yosemite in well under a day. And this wall is about 50% taller. It's 4,500 feet. So it should take us a day and a half. That was our mental arithmetic. And we got on the route. The climbing was incredible. we ended up on this large shield of granite with very technical mixed climbing, and it was pitch after pitch of climbing that really held me at my limit. And I was performing well. I remember feeling super good, but we were not moving fast enough to get this thing done in a day and a half. And this is a photo at the end of day 2, about halfway up the wall, when a storm had blown in, and we were trying to set up a bivvy on a little ledge that was not quite big enough for our tent. And it's funny for me to look back at this photo. I mean, I look pretty disgruntled as a little 24-year-old. And as I reflect on this experience, if I were there now, it would be such an easy decision to just rappel down and go get more snacks and try again. But as a 24-year-old who had been reading all this aggressive, muscular climbing literature, I was like, oh no, we're not going down. We can only go up. We're committed. And I have these memories of like not being worried at all about the fact that we didn't really have any food left, or we were running low on gas, or there was still tons of mountain above us. I just remember being like so psyched that we were in it. And this is a passage kind of exploring how I think I felt at the time. But even as we flirted with the murky line between survival and exploration, I was not afraid of dying. I recognized the seriousness of the situation, but as I listened to the snow blowing by, I felt that I was keeping my hands steady as I stared into the void. It didn't bother me. I was confident I would be able to step back from the edge. This is what you came for. This is what you yearn for. This is everything that you want. And I'm really delighted to report that after quite a few more days of climbing, and after about 99 hours, we did actually make it back to base camp in one piece. Thank goodness. And I remember getting back to base camp and looking back on those memories of being, once again, at an inflection point where it's like, maybe I should do something different next time. Or maybe this isn't a good idea. But all I remember is like wanting more, which is pretty funny to reflect on. And I think that, kind of going back to writing this memoir now versus later, I think it's actually something that I've expressed this to the folks at Mountaineers Books, that I'm really happy I did this, because I think that those memories, if I had written this in 25 years, would be faded. And I would have written something, I probably would have made half of it up. But like these memories of being on these early climbs are still really salient. And it was really interesting and quite lovely to kind of dig back into who I was and the climber that I have subsequently become, and maybe be able to demonstrate some lessons about how we can all do things better, and how we can maybe just collectively rappel down for more snacks when needed. And I think another component to this kind of digging back into who I was when I was a young climber was also this question that really started to bubble up as I was working on this project, which was getting into climbing in the first place. What drew me in? And I think that you might expect that as a young climber, when I first went into the mountains, I found myself. And I loved what I was doing, and maybe I did pretty well. And it was clear that it's something I should pursue. But when I started reflecting on those memories of first going to the mountains, when I was about 15 years old in the Cascades outside of Seattle, Washington, the memories that I came back with were of being cold, of being tired, of being scared, of being hungry, of getting very badly sunburnt. And I don't remember having fun. I don't remember doing particularly well. And it was kind of like, oh wow, how did I end up choosing this as something that I was going to pour my life into? It didn't go that well, and I don't remember having a particularly good time. And so that turned into something that I was kind of trying to solve, something that I was trying to figure out. And this is a passage that I think kind of describes what I came up with, which is that as a privileged white kid growing up in the suburbs, it had been easy to avoid pain or severe challenge. I knew I wanted something outside of the bounds of the small, safe town I lived in, even though I couldn't have articulated it at the time. The mountains offered it to me. It was something deep and complex that I had never experienced before. It was more than the muscular strain of pulling myself up steep terrain. It was something closer to blood in my mouth after a fight that I had never experienced. I liked the taste. It was tickling a dark corner of my heart that up until that point I didn't know existed, and it was part of me that I wanted to get to know better. And it was really interesting for me to kind of dig back into that and think about like what climbing offered me that nothing else in my life did. It offered me a level of agency, and it offered me these decisions in which I was in control of my own destiny. Literally, life or death was in the balance. Also, I think I could clearly see ways that I could do better, which I think was pretty attractive. But fair to say that I did really enjoy it, or I was very inspired by it. And by the time I was 18 years old, I had basically stopped everything else I was doing. I was going climbing all the time. And through my early 20s, I went on dozens of expeditions, and every job and every relationship that I had was in service to my career as an alpinist. But as I cracked the whip and drove myself down this path, this need for balance grew in me slowly. This kind of sense that doctrine that I had grown up with as an early climber, maybe there was something that wasn't quite right. And it started with this feeling of kind of being incomplete, a subtle sadness or sense of loss. But as I was repeatedly told by girlfriends that I was not present enough, and non-climbing partnerships fell by the wayside, it developed into this feeling that I would never settle down, and I would never have a stable relationship. I really specifically remember thinking that I would just be one with the mountains until the end of my days, and being kind of comfortable with that. And this is, I was like 26 years old. And it was something that I remember feeling like very clearly. And the thing that kind of got me out of that funk or out of that rut was facilitated by a combination of some of that sage wisdom that we talked about earlier and some mandatory downtime. So in 2011, I had been climbing a lot, and the New Zealand Alpine Club decided to give me the New Zealand Alpinist of the New Zealand Alpinist of the Year award. And the reason they gave that to me was because I'm actually, not that you would know from my accent, I am a Kiwi. I was born down there, and some of my early climbing experiences were actually down in New Zealand. It's where I really cut my teeth in the mountains. And it's a climbing culture that I was really proud to be a part of. I still am. And to receive that award was this huge deal. And I flew back down there. I went on a speaking tour. I was feeling great. I was feeling top of the world. I was feeling like I could do anything. And then I got invited by some dear friends to go and try a route that had never been done before, kind of in the Mount Cook route. And I remember the feeling of like, oh yeah, a first ascent, that's like what I do. I'd love to come. And so we head into the mountains, and we go and we get to this ice route that they wanted to attempt. And I remember it like didn't look as steep as I wanted it to, and I was like, oh, but it'll be fun. And so we go get on the route, and my ego was fully inflated. I was feeling great. And then there we were on the second pitch of this climb, and I was seconding, and a large pillar of ice about 300 feet above us collapsed and came pouring down the climb. And I happened to be the one who was just standing right in the middle of it and got fully squashed. I ended up hanging from the rope with a broken leg and a shattered shoulder and a big laceration on my scalp. I was a real mess, and I will not bore you or drag you through the story of like walking back to the car and getting back to town. But I do think it is worth bringing a little bit of levity. I'm going to share one story from when we did actually get back to town. The nearest city large enough to have a hospital was Timaru, 3 hours south of Paul and Shelley's home in Christchurch. It was late when we arrived in town, exhausted and hungry. It had been a long day, and we had not taken the time to eat. Knowing that it would be hard to get a meal in the hospital, I asked if we could stop for a burger. It was well past sunset. when we pulled into the fast food place, and despite the protests from my partners, I crawled out of the car and hobbled inside. Staggering out of the cool night air and into the fluorescent lights amid clean plastic surfaces felt like entering another world, one to which in that moment I did not belong. The conversations in the restaurant quieted and all eyes drifted towards me. My right arm was tied up in a coil of rope. I was limping badly, and a stain of blood ran down my face and onto my bright green down jacket. I did not care. Ignoring the attention, I walked across the restaurant to lean against the counter. Could I please have a burger and a water? I asked, trying to act as if nothing was wrong. Also, do you happen to know how to get to the hospital? Wide-eyed, the woman at the counter handed me the food and pointed me up the road. So fair to say that we did make it back to town. I got my burger, I got to the hospital, they did some x-rays, and I was looking at a long period of time when I was not going to be able to go climbing. And it was this paradigm shift for me. It was this point when I started looking at my climbing up until that day as less of a kind of bunch of glory and climbing routes and doing amazing things, and I started just seeing mistakes. I started really questioning the decisions that I was making, and I knew that I wanted to continue climbing, but I also knew that I needed to figure out a better way to get at the mountains. And when I talk about some of that sage advice that I received, some of it showed up at a very opportune moment in those months while I was recovering. One of it came from a dear friend, Nick Nyman, who had just finished a degree at the Chicago Institute of Art. He was a fine arts photographer, and he had this very creative view on the world. I, on the other hand, had just finished a very scientific program at a non-liberal arts school focused on glaciohydrology, and I was very focused on my methodology and data and systems. And I remember thinking that Nick's whole view on the world was pretty squishy. I remember thinking that it really lacked rigor. And I think that he thought I was kind of a pain in the ass and probably needed to calm down a little bit about my need for data. But we had all this time together. He was in Seattle trying to figure out his next steps in his career. I was in Seattle, pretty banged up and trying to recover. And we spent weeks and weeks of time together. We became very, very close friends, and we spent a lot of time talking about our two different perspectives on the world. And it was really powerful because eventually I reached a point where I started to see the value of being creative, the value of storytelling, and being able to leverage those things in order to inspire folks, and being able to leverage stories in order to drive action in the world around me. And I think by the same virtue, he kind of learned a little bit about methodology, and I think that's helped him over the years as well. But it really kind of set me onto this different course where I was thinking not just scientifically, I was thinking about the world through a different lens that turned out to be very powerful. It was also during this time that I met a guy named Kai Bune. And Kai was quite a bit older than me, and he turned me on to this concept of the 100-year plan, which is something that really resonates through this entire memoir. And it's the idea that any decision that we make in the mountains or while climbing should be put through this filter of, will this give me the ability to live to be 100 years old? And when he first introduced me to this, I remember him saying something like, if you don't die, you'll do a lot more climbing. And I remember at 26 being like, oh yeah, well, more climbing is what I want to do. So don't die, great, okay, copy. But it's developed into this much broader kind of philosophy of taking the longer view on our climbing careers. Taking not just the view of I have this trip or this pitch in front of me and this is my chance and I have to do everything I can to make it happen, but instead to be lifting our gaze and looking down a career of going to the mountains and to the crags over and over again, doing that in a way that is sustainable with the rest of our lives, and making sure that we show up prepared, making sure that we show up with the right people, that we show up fit with the right equipment that we need but also understanding that it is not always the right time to go. This feels particularly important to be talking about right now, where we just bailed on an entire ice festival because conditions weren't right. It was like we all wanted to be out there ice climbing. We all came to this part of the world to climb the badass pillars that form on the lakeshore, but it was not the right time. And so here we are, drinking beer and telling stories, and it's really great. But this is sweet. This is really fun. So that's that philosophy of like how we make decisions in the mountains is something that was really, really powerful for me. And it's also crucial for me to note that it was during this time that I also met this woman, Shannon McDowell, who is now my wife. And that was a pretty pivotal moment in my life as well. And I think it's worth sharing that kind of a little bit like behind the scenes on the book. When I told her that, gosh, it looks like I'm going to be writing a memoir, she thought that was great, and she also she was really clear with me that it's like Shannon doesn't climb. Climbing is not something that she does. She was actually a professional athlete in another sport, and she was out chasing her career, I was chasing mine, and our relationship is formed wholly outside of the kind of climbing vernacular. And she was like, Graham, I know this is a climbing memoir, and I want you to know that it's okay if I'm not really in the book. Like, that's fine. And my response to her was, well, okay, I super appreciate that agency. What if you're, like, really in the book? And to which she kind of took a second and was like, didn't expect that. Ultimately, she has read the book and thinks it's good, so excellent. But it's that's pretty fun for me to share that she's a big part of it. In fact, the whole book is dedicated to Shannon. And so these were all things that showed up in my life kind of during that time, during that really key inflection point from that injury, and have really allowed for me to develop as a climber, not just in terms of my ability to grab small holds or climb steep ice pitches, but the kind of philosophy with which I was getting at the mountains. And I'll share that throughout this memoir, there are a few inflection points like that, times in my career that were really challenging, that I really kind of dug into in order to kind of explore what I learned from those periods. And one of the key motivators for writing this book was sharing a different vision for a life dedicated to climbing or dedicated to alpinism. And one that leans into balance or harmony as a strength rather than as a weakness. And alongside a vision for how we as climbers, for people who love these activities, who love this community and love these parts of the world, how we can leverage our stories in order to drive change in the world around us. So we're going to fast forward to kind of near the end of the book. And in 2020, I had a really special year. It was that year that my partners, Mark and Steve and Chris and I, were awarded the Piolet d'Or for a climb that we had done in 2019 on a peak called Linksar. This is a photo. It was sweet. And I think the last time I was here, I was actually fresh off that climb and sharing those stories, which is pretty fun. And this climb was really special. This climb was very big, it was very steep, and it required everything that each of us had to pour into it. There was so much trust between the partners on that climb, and that trust was essential to us getting to the summit. And to have been awarded the Piolet for that climb was unreal. To be honest, couldn't believe it at the time. But the same year, I was offered the opportunity to represent our community at Congress and address our federal Congress on the changes that I was seeing in the world around us, in the mountains and at the crags, and sharing those stories as a tool for driving climate action. And It was this really powerful moment because it was this moment when it felt like I needed to make a choice between one of these two things, between either going and pursuing climate advocacy or continuing going to the big mountains of the world to chase down these big objectives. And I kind of agonized over that. It was something that was honestly like kind of challenging. And in the end, after some really good discussions with Shannon, after some really good advice, I ended up making the choice to see if I could do both. And what I found, and what is ultimately kind of one of like the most important lessons I think to share from this book, is that by finding this pathway through which I was pursuing this career in advocacy, and I was pursuing this marriage with my wife Shannon, and I was still going to the big mountains, I wasn't finding that to be a contradiction to my ability to climb. I instead found that it enabled my ability to climb. I found that without Shannon teaching me how to train, or my work in advocacy providing me more purpose or time at home, my time at home also giving me more time to prepare and to rest. Without those things, I never would have been able to take on an objective like Linksar. And also these stories from the mountains were proving to be one of my most potent tools for taking on this advocacy work. I was finding that they worked in conjunction in this really beautiful way. So in 2021, I went to this peak. Does anybody recognize this? K2. It's the second highest peak on the planet. It's also known as Chogari by the locals. And we went to attempt the first alpine-style ascent of the peak's West Ridge. I guess the West Ridge Direct, to be more specific. And it was this really incredible moment when my career as an alpinist and my career as an advocate really converged. And I think that's really well captured in this passage. Sitting back on my ledge, I once again looked at the winding West Ridge beneath us. It was no longer just the way we had come, but also the path we would take in retreat. It was the same terrain I had been looking at an hour earlier, but now it looked different. Now it represented the 6,000 feet of the route we had climbed and bailed. Progress seemingly to nowhere. I thought back to other times I had looked down a route like this, staring down the sheer northeast buttress of Mount Lorenz in Alaska or the southeast wall of Linksar in Pakistan. There were times that due to conditions, weather, equipment failure, or technical challenge, I had been forced to retreat. There were times when I had reached an oftentimes hard-to-define line that I dared not cross for fear of not returning. Yet I had learned from each of these decisions and subsequently survived to continue to pursue the practice of alpinism. Eventually, I had always come back stronger and better. I was also grateful for other memories, times in which my partners and I had decided to push forward into the unknown of a steep wall, one pitch at a time, reaching for one more handhold or seeking the next piece of protection that would unlock the climbing above. There were times when we had defined for ourselves the vague difference between danger and fear, the former to be avoided and the latter to be explored and, if possible, set aside. As I looked down the west ridge of Chogari, I knew that despite the frustration I felt, this is another lesson in humility that I would process in time and reflect upon for the rest of my life. Now, the reason that we bailed on K2, on the West Ridge, was not because of a storm, it was not because of fitness or equipment failure, but it was because of heat. We were up at about 7,000 meters on our first attempt, and during the day at that altitude, we were experiencing temperatures in the shade of about 12 degrees centigrade or in the mid-40s in Fahrenheit. It's like an altitude generally where you're thinking about maybe starting to put on the puffy suit. And instead, we're up there too hot in our long johns. And mind you, it was also gorgeous weather, so the sun was very hot. And we're sitting on this ledge that is quite small, like the size of a small tent platform. And we were in this little island of safety, and the mountain was collapsing around us. When it gets hot like that, at an altitude like that, the snow starts to melt, that starts to unchain small avalanches, and all the ice holding the rock together starts to melt, and the rock starts to collapse. And we're just sitting there watching this mountain crumble around us. And we were there all day because we had to wait till the middle of the night in order to start rappelling. And I remember being kind of caught off guard by this. I remember feeling like, oh man, I've been doing this climate advocacy work, but I still kind of expected it to be cold up here, and it wasn't. And I remember looking down that mountain. I remember thinking about not just our ability to climb on K2, but I remember thinking about our friends who live in these valleys that were below us. I thought specifically about my friend Rasul, who lives in the village of Houché, which is down kind of below K2, down like near Masherbrum. And I was thinking about his attitude towards climate change. I was thinking about his actions around climate change. Let's be clear, Rasul doesn't have a vote. Rasul doesn't have a carbon footprint. Rasul doesn't have any way to drive systemic action. When it comes to how Rasul thinks about climate change, he's like building rock gabions in order to protect his village from floods that are caused by glacial retreat. He's thinking about water scarcity and his ability to grow crops to feed his family. And I'm sitting up there on K2 thinking about all this and really kind of struggling with what I should do. We rappelled down. It took us about 2 days to rappel off the peak. We got back to base camp. It stayed hot. It stayed stormy for the rest of the summer. We didn't actually even end up back on the route. And we went back down, and I remember really being kind of tortured by this whole experience because I really wanted to climb K2. It's something I wanted badly, but I was totally shut down by this thing that I was like working really hard to fix, and I didn't really know what the solution was there. And the thing that I ended up finding was that as I got back into advocacy work when I got home, as I kind of started to pour myself back into that, the story of going to K2, of thinking about Rasul, of thinking about the impact that climate is having on so many communities around the world, including our own, it turned into one of my most powerful and potent stories for driving the change that we need. And it was this really amazing thing to realize, is that these stories that we have from the mountains, from the crags, from the Michigan Ice Festival are one of our most important tools for driving the change that we need in the world around us. And that's something that really this experience on K2 really drove home and is ultimately became one of the major purposes of writing this book. And that's what this title, A Fine Line, is all about. It's all about defining this balance in which we can take on these huge mountains while also being good partners, being good representatives of our community, and driving the change that we need in the world around us. And the thing that I want to leave you with is, ultimately, when I think about this book, I wrote this for our community. I wrote this for you. And the reason that I wanted to do that, the reason that I'm so proud and delighted to be up here presenting to you about this right now, is because as we think about climate, as we think about the changes that we're seeing, we all have stories about how climate change is impacting our climbing, how it's impacting our communities, community health, how it's impacting marginalized communities way more than others, how it is showing up in every part of our lives, and how we each have these incredible stories from the crags, from the mountains, that we can utilize to drive that change that we need. The other part of that is one of my favorite things, is that the other thing that we need in order to solve climate is positive thinking, and we need courage. And when I think about our climbing community, when I think about all of you, you're a group of people who index super highly on courage. Literally, you came to northern Michigan in order to climb frozen waterfalls, which is a just baseline super courageous thing to do. And I think you also really have to have a pretty positive outlook in order to step onto a frozen waterfall and think, this will be sweet. And because of those three things, because we have the stories, we have the positive outlook, and we have the courage, I really feel that we are the community to take this thing on. So thank you for having me this evening. I super appreciate all of you, and I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. Okay, cool. All right, so I think we have time for a couple questions. Where's your mustache? Oh, where's the mustache? So I woke up one morning and it had crawled away. And I've been looking for it ever since. If you see it around, let me know, please. Moving on. Any other questions? The book. Oh, in what way is my wife a big part of the book? So my wife has been my sounding board. She has been my best friend. She has been my partner on all of this. She hasn't been my climbing partner per se, but in terms of all the decisions that I make when I go to the mountains and how I take on this advocacy work, how I take on a career climbing and a career working in advocacy, she is like, we have been lockstep on all of that. So she is like, after we meet in I think chapter 4, she is all over it, and that's something that's really authentic for me. Like, she is somebody who, like, I don't really keep any of the climbing stuff from her. I don't keep any of the challenges around the climate work from her. We take on all that stuff together, and while she may not be up on the mountain with me, she's intrinsic to all of it. How did I start to integrate photography and storytelling and filmmaking into alpinism? That's a really good question. So I'll share that, for me as a professional climber, or just as a professional in general, I've always had to find a pathway through which I could fund these expeditions, get them paid for, and either get them supported through sponsorship or through jobs that I was working outside of climbing. Which it's funny for me to call myself a professional climber because I've always had a job outside of being like a pro climber. So I actually got asked on a podcast what my profession was, and I told them I was a semi-professional hill walker, because I felt like that was maybe more accurate than like a pro climber. But all that to say, when I was exploring how to make a living from climbing, it was pretty clear that I wasn't going to have a camera crew along with me on these big expeditions. Not only couldn't I afford that, but it was also going to be this logistical mega hassle. And so what I needed to do was learn how to tell those stories myself. And that's ultimately what I did. I figured out how to bring cameras along. I figured out how to edit those photos and videos into something semi-coherent. And that became a really important part of my career, to the point where actually back in 2016, I actually launched a film production company and ran that for a number of years. And so I think that the main thing was just making sure that I had systems that I could leverage in order to get shots while climbing that didn't compromise the climbing that I was doing, which is something I'm super happy to talk folks through in terms of what those systems look like and things like that. But ultimately, I think that in climbing we have this choice to either keep it to ourselves or to figure out ways to share these stories. And I think either of those options are fine. I have friends who are fabulous climbers and fabulous skiers who just don't really tell anybody about it, and they just do it for themselves, which is awesome. But for me, in order to pay for these expeditions I wanted to do, I needed to figure out how to tell those stories, and that's what I did. All right, I think we got time for one more.
How do you affect climate change in your everyday life?
How do I take on climate action in my everyday life? Great question. So I'm just going to kind of nosedive into the conversation of personal versus systemic change and how we take on the climate emergency. So we have been sold the idea that we solve climate through personal change, through driving less, flying less, eating less meat. And while it is crucial that we live an examined life, it is not how we solve the climate crisis. The way that we solve the climate crisis is through changing the systems in which we live. And that will mean that we're changing the the systems that not only that we live in, but also the corporations around us are operating in, the governments are operating in. And there's another part of that conversation that I think is really important, which is that when we talk about personal change, it is something that tends to either require a lot of technological regression or a lot of money. And that is dependent on how much money is in your bank account. And if you have enough money to buy an EV and put solar panels on the home that you own and work remotely and all those things, that's great. You should absolutely do that. But for most people in this country and for most people on this globe, that is not an option. They don't have the resources to do that, which means that their option for personal change is turn the heat off and turn the lights off and maybe try to grow carrots in the backyard and see how that goes, which is not something that we want to ask anybody to do, and it means that that personal change argument has a massive social equity problem. And by changing the systems in which we live, we can bring everybody along on this clean energy journey that provides us with clean air and clean water and a better relationship with this planet that we live on. And so when we talk about that systemic change, when we talk about how we drive that systemic change, we do that through policy and government. And that is why voting is so important. That is why calling your reps is so important. That is why making sure that in this upcoming election that everybody you know is voting. And if you work for an organization that has a big impact, look for ways that you, from within that organization, you can drive some change or have them impact policy or the community that they're operating in. And so I think that looking for those bigger levers, and within those levers, how we can leverage these stories that we have from the mountains, that is the best way to drive change. That's what I've been doing with the American Alpine Club and with Protect Our Winters. And that is something that I think if you look at the lives you're living, if you look at what things you touch in the world around you, I think you will find that there are levers that you can operate in ways that you can drive that change that we need. Yeah. Well, y'all kick ass. Thanks for having me. We'll see you soon.
I don't know about you, but I could listen to Graham on an audiobook with that voice. It's amazing. Look good. So if you happen to be at the Mountain Books book signing, we did sell all of Graham's books, but go home, go to your local bookstore, and have them, if they don't have it, order it from your local bookstore and pick it up. I think it'll be a great read. So once again, thanks again, Graham. We're going to take a couple-minute break here so we can get Will's show set up, and we'll continue. So see you in a few.